of three local EV drivers. One is a hybrid EV, and the other two are both EVs. So I'm going to go through them in turn. I've got Frank, Karen and Mark, and I'm going to start with Frank because I think anybody who's actually considering an electric vehicle will want to know what it's like when you first get one, because there's a technology barrier that one has to deal with, really. So if I can go to Karen first, because you're unmuted.
Right, yes, okay. Okay, well, I have been an EV driver since February 2017. I was a skeptic to begin with. My husband bought a smart EV back in 2014, and it was always a little bit of a joke because it didn't go very far on range, but he did manage to go to Southern Ireland in it. It was planned with military precision, and he went all the way to Southern Ireland and back without a hitch. My father-in-law, my late father-in-law, bought a Tesla, and I was still very skeptical. Was fortunate enough to get an electric car in February 2017. It was going from a diesel guzzling Freelander to a fairly high powered electric car was a steep learning curve, lots of technology, lots of things to learn, a completely different way of driving, different mindset of charging and learning how all the gadgets work. But looking back, it seems like an absolute lifetime ago and a completely different way of driving, a completely different way. The concept of stopping and putting fuel in now is kind of alien to me. Being able to get up every morning and essentially have a full tank of fuel because I've charged the car up. It's a very interesting concept. And I wouldn't consider now going back to driving a diesel car or a petrol car. My first journey was my first long journey was within the first week of ownership. And I drove from home to Swansea and back. And I planned my journey with round charging. The whole trip took me, it was kind of 6 hours there and about 15 million hours back because every road I chose was closed. But I found it stressless because I didn't have lots of gear changing, and the charging wasn't a hassle. I just stopped and charged for 20 minutes, half an hour, however long the car basically told me that I needed to charge to get, further down the road. So by the time you stopped for a tea break and a nip to the loo, you were on your way again. And so there's a lot of conflict with people kind of saying, well, I'm going to be spending half my time at a petrol station filling up or whatever at the motorway services. And it's kind of not like that really, because the fast chargers, the rapid chargers, they're so quick that you are literally on your way a lot faster than you would imagine. It takes some getting used to, but as I say, almost 3 years down the line now, I wouldn't go back.
Okay, that's interesting. Mark, what was your experience? You've got a plug-in hybrid, is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. I used to drive a Toyota pickup truck, and so I needed something which was quite big because I'm an event manager principally, and I have to carry a lot of gear around for events that I do. So there was nothing on the market that could compete with the space of a pickup truck, but the Outlander was about the biggest thing I could get that had electric in it. I did test drive the RAV4, which was a Toyota, but I test drove that in the summer of 2019, and I needed a new vehicle in September 2019, and that wasn't going to be available until March 2020. so the RAV was out for me. So then I had to look at what was going to be available on the market, and Mitsubishi Outlanders were readily available. So it kind of made the choice for me.
And as a plug-in hybrid driver, is that something that doesn't have the same technological barriers to the full EV, or?
Well, yes, it does. And I'd obviously done quite a bit of research into electric vehicles, and none of them would have suited me for what I did in terms of the size of a vehicle anyway. But I don't have any range anxiety with a plug-in hybrid. I only get 23 miles of pure electric out of the batteries, but for a short commute, that means that I'm fully electric.
Yeah.
But then the petrol engine isn't like a typical petrol engine. It doesn't drive the wheels. It generates electricity to drive the motors. So it is electric all the time and is more economical than the diesel that I used to drive.
Right. Okay.
Considerably so.
Right. Okay. Frank, what were your experiences?
Well, my journey to EV started in 2016. At the time, I had an Audi SQ5. It was 3 years old, done about 36,000 miles. And for whatever reason, it was diesel, and I just wanted to get rid of a diesel car. And my son, who was 35 at the time, said he was going to buy an electric car. And I said, well, yeah, that really sort of started me, really, because I thought, well, goodness me, my son's ahead of me. I've got to get ahead of him, technologically wise, at least. So I researched the Tesla, and it was a lot more expensive than I wanted to spend. But I worked out that, you know, I was spending £2,000 a year on diesel at the time on the Audi SQ5, and I was going to save about £1,700 a year on diesel. So I factored that in and said, okay, I'll take the thing for 5 years, and you know, I'll go that way. So anyway, I picked the car up on the 23rd of December. I had to pick it up from Heathrow because they didn't have anywhere else I could pick the car up from. So luckily we were going down to see our family down there, my son. So I drove down to Heathrow, picked up the electric vehicle. It was fully charged, drove round from Heathrow down round to Sevenoaks in Kent. I don't know, it's about 60 miles or something like that. And sort of started to get used to the car driving around the M25. That was fine. We were going to stay there over Christmas for 4 or 5 days. And of course, the family all wanted to go out in the car because they wanted to see it. And, you know, the kids wanted to see it and all the rest of it. So by the time we left there on the 28th of December, I didn't have very much power left. Ben didn't have anywhere to off-street charge. But I said, don't worry about it. I'll be driving round to Bishop Stortford around the M25, is about 50 miles away. I can charge there. So, and that's where my range anxiety really began. Drove round to Bishop Stortford, not a problem. As Karen said, plugged into the, it was a Tesla charging spot at Bishop Stortford on the M11. And it charged up so quickly. I've been to, you know, plugged it in, went to the loo, grabbed a cup of tea, went back out to the car. And by the time I'd sort of got out there, I'd got a thing on my phone saying the car's ready to go. Now, it put in about 150 miles in, I don't know, 30 minutes or something like that. But it was not fully charged. It was only about 75% charged. And I said, well, not to worry, I'm going to go to the Ecotricity one at Grantham. Well, it was the 28th of December. It was cold, windy and wet. And so I plugged in the sat nav, and the sat nav says, you know, you've got to go to the next place you've got to go is Grantham, because if you don't stop there, you're not going to get home. So anyway, we started going to Grantham, and it was raining. It was cold inside the car, so got the heating on, got the windscreen wipers going, the electric lights by this time, the lights were on. And gradually, as I got further and further to Grantham, it kept on coming up. You must drop your speed to 50 miles an hour in order to get to Grantham. So that's when my range anxiety really started to kick in, and I was thinking, what the heck have I just done? I got a perfectly good diesel car that got plenty more miles on it, and I've just gone and bought this damned electric vehicle. Anyway, got to Grantham, and lo and behold, the Ecotricity plug-in charger didn't work. So I had, I don't know, about 30 miles left in the tank, in the batteries. And I managed to get to another station. When I got there, I plugged it in, and it was a slow charger. It wasn't like the one in Bishop Stortford where I plugged it up, you know, it's straight up in five minutes. Yeah, it took, it was charging at 25 miles in an hour. Well, I'd still got about 100 miles to go home. And, you know, so it was getting colder, darker. You know, we turned off the heating by this time in the car. I'd only use the windscreen wipers intermittently. And anyway, we charged at the next station. So in the next place, by that time, we'd been there for an hour. We'd been in and outside of the service station. So the next place was on the 62. I forgot the name of the service station right now. Near Doncaster, David, you'll know the
Ferry
one.
Bridge.
Ferry Bridge, thank you very much. Got to the one at Ferry Bridge. The fast charger wasn't working on Ecotricity. It was only the slow charger was working, so I was back into the same boat. By this time, we'd been traveling for about 6 hours, 6.5 hours on typically a 4.5 hour journey. So got to Ferry Bridge, plugged it in, and the charger kicked out. It didn't work. So I thought, well, by that time I got I think about 55 miles to get back to Hovingham, and because of the rain, the rain and the cold, I thought, you know, I just can't chance that. So I better divert to a Tesla charger over in Leeds. There was one at a hotel there, a destination charger, what they call. So instead of going home, we drove over to Leeds and crept into Leeds. I don't know, with 20 miles left in the batteries. I plugged it in, and we walked into the hotel, and because it was at a hotel, and we sat down and had a meal because we were so exhausted by that time. So it charged in about 35-40 minutes, so we're fully charged to go home. When we finally got home, we'd been on the road for 11.5 hours, and it cost me about 60 quid in food and drink and all the rest of it. And I was thinking, what the heck? So that my very first long journey got me over any range anxiety. I never left the house since without knowing exactly where I'm going and which charger I'm going to go to.
Yeah, I think
that's my experience.
Yeah, I think the moral of the tale is you just take a bit more care in journey planning with an EV. Anyway, we've got lots of questions coming in, and I'm going to answer one or two of the ones that I can actually answer. The running costs of recharging, well, that'll depend, because if you charge at home, you probably work out at 4p a mile. If you're on the sort of motorway network, I think Ecotricity are now charging it out at 30 pence unless you have Ecotricity, your electricity supplier, and then you can get a different rate. And most of the other chargers, it'll depend which network actually provides those chargers. So if you're a member of Polar, it can vary from 10p a kilowatt up to maybe 40p a kilowatt, and a kilowatt will get most people 4 miles in terms of distance. I think in most electric vehicles, some of them are more efficient than that, but generally speaking, I think that's the accepted range. Karen.
I was just going to say as well, there are a lot of the electricity companies now have got specific tariffs, green tariffs, but there are a lot that have tariffs that are specifically for EVs. and they kind of work a little bit like an economy 7 kind of thing. So they charge when it's cheaper overnight.
Yeah.
And you can get some circumstances where you end up kind of with them owing you money, not the other way around, if it's kind of right. And it does save a lot of money. I think we worked it out that the cost of running is about 1/5 of what you would run a petrol or a diesel car.
Yeah. Frank?
Yeah, just following up from that, we just had an offer from Octopus and Tesla for with battery storage for electric vehicles, and they're offering electricity at 6p a kilowatt. So you've got to go have you've got to have some solar panels, you've got a battery pack, so you've got some capital outlay. But they're offering a 6p a kilowatt. So it's a long-term good investment, I would suggest.
Yeah, can I just add as well that I worked it out tonight just for some rough figures since February 2017, and about 55,000 miles of traveling, where it would have cost me about £6,500 in diesel. It's actually ended up costing, without any deductions for the fact that we've got solar and we can charge off solar, it would have cost about £1,300 to run the car for that distance.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, as far as sort of the trend, Eden's asked a question about the trend for bigger vehicles, SUVs. I don't know how many people saw an article, I can't remember what it was in, but very recently, and it had quite a staggering figure about how much better it would be for the world if we didn't have SUVs, because of the extra amount of fuel they use because they're so big. And all I can say is I think that's something that we're all a little bit conscious of, and we're probably all going to become a lot more conscious of that over the next 10 or 15 years. And I think that discussion itself is one that we all need to have a think about, because we really need to have less vehicles on the road, is the bottom line. We've got a good question about batteries in winter. I'm no scientist, but I can tell you that in the depths of winter, you do get less miles on your battery. So
David, mine does about 250 in the summer and about 220 in the winter. So I lose 30 miles because of the windscreen wipers and lights and longer nights and stuff like that. Yeah, and obviously the heating.
Yeah, I think also that batteries are less efficient.
Yeah.
When it's cold. So if I was a scientist, I could give you the real answer why that happens, but I'm not, so I can't.
Yeah.
And as far as infrastructure at home, I must admit, I just tend to plug mine into a 13-amp socket that I've had uprated by an electrician. I don't know what other options the rest of the panel use. Frank?
So went into this in quite a lot of detail, David, right at the very beginning. Typically a new house has got about 85 kilowatts coming into it, and older houses have only got about 65. So I was concerned, we've got an air source heat pump. So I was concerned that takes about 40 kilowatts. So I was concerned that I wasn't going to have enough power to be able to charge the electric vehicle. Anyway, I managed to put in a 7 kilowatt, a 32 amp charger, which charges literally about 25 miles an hour. So my charger comes in at night. It's normally on a timer with the car. So about 11 o'clock at night, and by the morning it's put in 150, 200 miles. So to Karen's point, I always leave the house with a full tank every day. Yeah, and but you know, sometimes you do need to check that. It is worth checking to see how much power you've got, and you can always, you know, charge it at different times. I choose to charge mine at night because it suits me, and you know, I haven't got any heating on at night either. So it's just little things like that that people need to be aware of.
Okay, Karen.
Yeah, we have the chargers at home. You can also charge just off a 13 amp socket with the relevant connector, whose name completely escapes me, which is very slow. But it is possible to do. If you are able to get some solar panels, then it is very beneficial to do so. You can charge during the day if if you have to be working from home or whatever. That does reduce costs as well. And it is worth investigating. There's various different chargers on the market, ranging from average prices up to much more expensive, but they all do much of a muchness, the same type of, they do the same job.
Yeah, good. Okay, I think yeah, I think Craig's asked about where you currently charge in Ryedale. We are getting a better network slowly in Ryedale. Hovvingham, we have a reasonably quick charger, and if you're on the Polar network, that's currently at the moment 10p a kilowatt, and that will charge up most cars in somewhere between 3 and 5 hours. Unless you're maybe a Tesla, I think would probably take a little bit longer because it's a bigger battery. Obviously there's the ones in Malton, one in Norton, and there are some in Helmsley, but I don't go that way very often. But I'm sure there's something tucked around the back of Helmsley somewhere. Yeah, sorry,
David.
Yeah, far away.
There are presently about 17,000 petrol stations around the UK. The government are planning to put something like 23,000 electric vehicle chargers in situ by 2022, something like that. And Shell and BP, the two major diesel petrol providers, fossil fuel providers, are basically running the two largest UK charging companies. So they're rolling these out as quickly as they possibly can right now. And yeah, that's so range anxiety, going forward. In the past, when even when back in 2016, I would have to think about exactly where I was going in the UK. Today, I don't have to do that. I drive to Europe with a car. I get it charged everywhere. And if I go to friends that are out in the sticks somewhere, I take, to Karen's point, a 13 amp plug with me, and I charge it in overnight, and I've got 20 miles to get back to the next station the next day. So there's plenty of ways around it.
I think the main point is like I think we've all kind of said earlier, is that you kind of try and leave home on a full charge, because you'll find with driving an electric car, it isn't necessarily the local chargers, it's the ones that are further away that you have to plan your journeys for. Say, for example, the Tesla chargers, the nearest one's Leeds, the actual superchargers. If I was driving somewhere, I wouldn't stop at the nearest one. I would look to go to the next one on after that. So you always leave home with a full tank, basically. And actually, if I can answer a question that popped up from, it's disappeared now, either that I can't see it. It was a question about range, the longest range EV. It's disappeared off the side there. And the longest range at the moment is real world about 300 miles, and that's a Tesla Model 3. I think that was for Phil. Right.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. Good question again from Eden. Yeah. I think in an urban setting, I think the small EVs work really well. I think it's again, there's some way to go, I think, for people to catch up with we need less cars. And I think that is something that will dawn on our population at some point. We're all sold on convenience at the moment, and of course, I have to say that electric vehicles pander immensely to that convenience, but they do come with other considerations, because you do have to do that journey planning in advance, because if you, as Karen says, home patch, piece of cake, away from home, it's stop for a cup of coffee and a piece of cake whilst it charges up. Right, okay. Can you unmute Eden, Paul? Because Eden's got his hand up and he wants to ask a question.
Thank you, because I'm so stupid I can't find the hand up button on the screen. Anyway.
Don't worry.
There it is. Yeah, much appreciate that. Thank you. You'll gather I am concerned about the rapid rise of big EVs. Half our problem at the moment, I think, is pollution, especially carbon pollution or greenhouse gas pollution. As you know from our previous discussion the other day, buses at the moment, same pollution, environmental category as a car, is 3 times more efficient. And I think we've really got to push public transport. If you can use it, please do. But that's another issue. I'll get off my hobby horse. I think we've got to be aware that if we carry on having more and more cars and a very local situation, we're going to have the A64 dual. Now, I would imagine we're all fairly environmentally minded here. And I would think most of us don't want to see the A64 dual. It's a massive amount of concrete, massive amount of tarmac, enormous amounts of greenhouse gas turned out. And places like, I can't remember what it's called, between the top of Whitwell Hill and Golden Hill, where the Derwent sweeps inland, will the peace and tranquility of the Derwent SSI will disappear. Further on after Malton, there'll be a noise ribbon right across Ryedale into Scarborough District. Is that what we really need at the moment? Shouldn't we be getting people onto public transport? My ideal, I'm going to shut up in a minute, I promise. My ideal would be small electric cars, rentable from stations. So for the last mile, as it's called, you've got your trip home. Okay, your mile might be the top of Farndale. And for the rest, let's use public transport. Very interested that Simon Bowen the other day from Friends of the Earth said, forget the car, we've got to get to public transport. We're going to save the world. And he made no bones about it. And he's the clean air officer for Friends of the Earth. And he, of course, introduced Kevin Hollinrake, didn't he?
Yeah, well, you know, I think we all agree largely with those thoughts and ideas. And
With the hand up, she's going to hit me.
You know, we as we spoke the other day in the public transport session, it's an issue around here because nobody uses public transport.
No.
And my view, well, I gave it in that session. Anyway, Karen's got a hand up, so I'm going to go over to Karen. Thanks very much, Eden.
Thank you.
Ah, yes. Good evening, Eden. Hope you
Good evening, Karen. Nice to see you again.
Yes, nice
we
to
won't go
see
into
you
our
again.
past here, will we?
Yeah, I've put the world to rights in the pub with Eden on many an occasion. With regards to, I wholeheartedly agree with, you know, with what you said about getting vehicles off the road. Now, I can't recall whether I dreamt it or not, but I know that in Canada, in Vancouver, they have systems where you can, it's called car to go. And you basically just, like they have the electric bikes in London, in Vancouver, they've got little cars parked up and you basically just go and you know, take a car and then park it somewhere else. And you can basically just rent that car for doing city driving and what have you, which I think is a really, really good idea for urban areas. But we do struggle in rural areas because the public transport isn't what it was when I was growing up. You know, the services have disappeared and people don't tend to use them anymore. Even the RICAT services aren't really utilised as much as they could be. So there is a way to go to try and find out solutions for areas such as ours, which are predominantly rural, and people have got to get some means of getting from A to B. So there's lots of interesting questions, and I don't know that there's enough answers yet.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Hazel Winters asked us how long do batteries last? Frank, well, I mean, mine says it's guaranteed for 7 years from whenever it was built. So
yeah, I mean, I think mine's guaranteed for 8 years. The rate it's going right now, as I said, it started off at about 250 miles. I think it's probably down to about 240 now. So, you know, it has lost 4 or 5% in the 3 years that I've had it. And you know, Karen and I talk about fully charging it. We have a full tank. I don't actually do that. I call it a full tank, but it's around about 85%. If I'm going on a long journey, then I fully charge it to 250 or whatever it'll do now. But typically, in order to maintain the battery, and that's what you've got to be concerned about for the long term, if you charge it to around 70% every day, and that gives me about 180 miles, something like that, which is more than enough that I ever need when I'm traveling around locally. I'm going to Malton, I'm going to York, might go to Harrogate or whatever it is. So those types of journeys are, you know, 95% of my journeys are more than well covered with charging the battery up to 75%, and that I believe is helping to maintain it. Fingers crossed, because they're expensive.
okay, Mark, on as far as plug-in hybrids are concerned, you know, my big decision when it came to buying an electric car, I mean, I didn't buy a new one because you know, you got to cut your cloth accordingly, and that's still quite a barrier to a lot of people. But you know, some plug-in hybrids are available at what I would consider quite reasonable prices out there on the second-hand market. I mean, what advice would you give to people if they're thinking, well, I can't afford the full electric, I'm going to go for a plug-in hybrid because I tend to do only shortish journeys most of the time? What would your advice be?
Well, I can't answer the question about the cost on second-hand vehicles. Mine's a brand new one. I lease my vehicles, so I don't have that anxiety about battery life either, because in 3 years' time it'll be gone and I'll be getting another one. But certainly the hybrid, I think, is a good choice if you've got range anxiety, and if you're in a rural area such as we are. You know, it's a good compromise to have. It's giving you an electric vehicle, but with, you know, the ability to top it up with petrol and go as far as you need to.
Yeah.
And I think in 2 or 3 years' time, when infrastructure is better than it is now, I might well change my opinion. But currently, that's what I would suggest people do, is have a good look at the plug-in hybrids.
Okay, thank you. A couple of people, I think Wendy and Lucy, have asked us about apps and websites for charging stations. I think I tend to use ZapMap. I don't know if anybody else has got any better apps than that, but that is an app, and it works reasonably well. And it usually gives you pretty accurate real-time data. So, you know, if you're planning to use the Ecotricity charger wherever, you know, somebody's, you know, plugged into the one that you want, because, you know, we don't want to sit there for 4 hours whilst it charges up on the slow connection. So it is quite a different way of driving. Great when you're on your home turf. Caroline and myself quite often go to Scotland walking, and that's a better sort of charging system up there because the government's got behind it from very early on. So you just buy one card for Charge Places Scotland, and that's it. You know, you can more or less charge up at any charger. Some are free, some charge out at different amounts per kilowatt, but most of them work, you know, I would say better than our Ecotricity system, who put in the original charging network on the motorway and main A road networks that we've got. So yeah, that's an interesting one. I can't answer this next question. how, is it possible to pre-book a charger when you start your journey? I don't know of that, but I don't know if anybody else does.
Not really, but if you were, say, for a general journey, that kind of doesn't happen. It's kind of, you take your chances. A lot of apps will show if a charger is, when you're getting closer by, will actually show if a charger is in use or not. And if, for example, you're going on holiday somewhere, you're booking a holiday cottage or hotel or something like that, or a restaurant or something like that, sometimes it's quite a good idea to see if you can find one that's actually got a charger on site too. So there's various different ways of doing it, but I've not come across booking ahead unless you're going somewhere, say, there's a few local pubs and things, or ones out York way that have got chargers. If you go for a meal, you can charge while you're eating, kind of thing.
Yeah. Michael, that's a very good question. What happens if there is a queue at the charger? I think that's something that tends to crop up once or twice a year when you're out on the road. You've got it all planned, tickety boo. You're going to stop, you're going to have a coffee, 45 minutes later, your car's going to be charged, and then somebody's on the fast charger. And that's all awkward. Quite often, certainly if you go to Scotland, for example, where some of the charges are free, I'll be driving home from a week of walking in the Highlands, and you find some persons just thought, oh, well, I'll go and listen to sports results at 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon and read my paper because I'm 10% off full. And you're sort of thinking, hey, come on, I've got like 5 miles left on my battery. How long have I got to wait? But yeah, that is an issue that will only change as we get either better battery range and better charging sort of network.
Yeah, I mean, from a Tesla point of view, and I know Teslas tend to be high-end range price, although the 3's coming down, they're bringing out the Y, and this is not a plug for Tesla. But I can't remember ever having to wait at a Tesla charging station. I've been able to plug straight in. Now, but I can fully understand, and I normally check when I'm particularly on the motorway. I always go and look at what's happening to Ecotricity to see how many electric vehicles are being charged on there, because as David said, they've got the main franchise on the motorways for the time being. I don't believe they should have, because their technical support has not been as good as it should be, because you often see them bedraggled on the plug-in by the side of the charger. It's not lying on the floor. But in the next few years, literally as we're speaking, we got BP and Shell who are installing these like it's gone out of fashion, because their business model is changing, and they reckon by 2024 there will be a tipping point where there'll be more electric vehicles sold than petrol, than fuel, fossil fuel vehicles. So in the last 6 months, I think the sales for electric vehicles worldwide are just over 1 million. Well, 5 years ago, it took 5 years to sell the first 1 million electric vehicles, 17 months to sell the second million, and 6 months to sell the third 1 million. And that's just about where we are right now. It's still low, so it's still low volume, but there are ways around it. And once you've driven an electric vehicle, as Karen said, you won't go back to. I don't believe you go back to a fossil fuel vehicle.
Thanks, Frank. Nashma, I hope I've pronounced your name right. How much is the minimum time to charge the car and be able to use it? I've got a BMW i3. I can charge up on a 50 kilowatt rated charger and normally get a full charge in less than an hour. Quite a lot of cars, if they've got bigger batteries, it will take a little bit longer than that. How long does it take to charge a Tesla? I've no idea. Frank, Karen?
from empty at home Model 3, which is mine, is about 7 hours, so it's a night's sleep. If you're out on the road, because that's 32 kilowatt charger. But if you're out on the road and you've got your access to the supercharger network, it's less than an hour. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the charging network is changing, battery technology is changing. Tesla are actually at the forefront on the battery technology. Yeah, we are seeing 100 kilowatt rated chargers coming out. Only certain cars can actually take that amount. I think the max I can do on mine would be 50 anyway. But it's something that will improve over time. And there's all sorts of battery technology out there. You keep seeing that, it'd be great if we had it now. But, I think electric vehicles, whether it's the right decision or not for the government to push, I think we have to accept that very much it's where we're heading. And they're going to be important in all sorts of ways, grid balancing, and all sorts of things. So, I think they are what is going to be the future. And, if hydrogen fuel cells kick off, that's another type of electrical car. But at the moment, I don't think there are any in production. There's a few test models around. And I think they're looking at hydrogen really for more commercial vehicles. And Eden looks as though he knows more about this than I do.
Thank you, David. There aren't any cars as far as I know, but Transport for London ran an entire service route with hydrogen buses. Very successful they were too, except it's economies of scale and they had to have one huge refueling station for those. Scottish companies just started, and and of course Northern Rail are now conducting an experiment from Middlesbrough onwards using hydrogen. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, well I think we're just about at the end of the show.
I just spotted one hand up there. Is it Name?
Right.
If I pronounced that correctly, do you want to come in, Name? I think you're on.
Najmi, yes.
Najmi.
Actually, the last question I have is like, if I have a plan to buy a car right now and keep it, for instance, for 5 to 6 years, maximum 7. I don't think, like 5 to 6 years. What do you think? Like the better option is going to be hybrid now with the specific budget. So I don't have like lots of money to say like, okay, whatever. So another one. If within 5 years I want to have a car right now and I want to buy it right now, so what's your suggestion? Do you think like hybrid still is a better option?
My view would be that'll depend on what your normal mileage is. If your daily mileage is 20 or 30 miles, I would say hybrid's probably the way. I think that the best sort of cars it's difficult because the price is still ridiculous for electric vehicles. I think the Zoe gets fantastic write-ups and you can hire the battery. I don't know what their leasing system is for the battery. But they get pretty good write-ups, and obviously things are going to change because some of the bigger motor manufacturers are getting on board. We're seeing Volkswagen bring out more models. So we at the moment I personally, if my budget was 15,000, I'd be looking at hybrid. If it was 20, I'd be looking at electric, because I think there are second-hand cars out there. Just buy the best in terms of battery size that you can afford, because that's the only way you're going to protect yourself from range anxiety and a lot of planning on your journey when you leave home and go to see your friends the other side of the country or something like that, because that can be quite interesting. Karen.
Yeah, I was just going to, hi there. I was just going to say that Honda have brought an EV out now, and we have a Honda EV, and I think my husband will probably send me a message and correct me, but I think the range on that's about 175 miles, something along those lines. And it's a nice little car. That comes in about 25, 26. Also, Fiat 500s, they're bringing out a new all-electric version, which is going to have about a 200 miles range, and that's going to be available from about January next year. So it's basically just like the little Fiat 500, but a fully electric, not just a kind of modified petrol car, which is what some of the other ones are. And that's going to be in the region of about 20. So that's quite a funky little car as well, actually. So other manufacturers are kind of catching up, but as David says, it does rely on your mileage really, and working out, you know, if you can work out kind of that fifth of your petrol consumption versus what it would cost you in electricity for your mileage, that's probably quite a good gauge as to whether to jump for a hybrid or for a fully electric, if that's at all helpful.
Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks everybody for your questions. We have got some links that we're posting, but I mean, there is so much out on the internet. What I would say, if you want to see what it's like in terms of driving an electric car, yeah, you could always pose as a buyer of a new car, because most dealerships will sort you out with you know, a test drive, or maybe give you the car for a day or a weekend. But in the links that I've posted, if you're really thinking about it, there's a site on the internet called Fully Charged, and there's a 20-minute film which is condensed from, I think, 5 or 6 episodes. It's called Maddie Goes Electric, and it's, you know, probably the best thing I've seen out there, from getting the, you know, working out what car, what do you need to consider, you know, having a charging point put in, you know, driving, you know, so it is well worth watching. But there's loads of stuff out there, and you know, I can't compete with any of that. So you'll have to make your own choices and select which videos and YouTube you watch out there. But thanks everybody for joining. I hope it's been helpful, and hope you're going to come along to some of our other events. If you've always wanted to make fantastic crumbly compost, got North Yorkshire Rotters on tomorrow. I mean, it follows on really a bit from the circular economy earlier. So if anybody was on that digestate that comes out of an anaerobic digester is a fantastic fertilizer. So you're going to have like a mini little compost heap at the back of your house somewhere, producing something fantastic, and you'll end up not throwing away your green waste, which it's another plus point, because it's just unbelievable, you know, how much we throw out that we could actually deal with in a much better way. Anyway, I'm going to shut up because I'm sure you've all heard more than enough. Okay, thanks very much for joining.
Take care.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Cheers now. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.